back to the show. Let's welcome our next guest now. Rumit Dugar, who is the Director Research at Religare Capital Markets, joins us to talk about a couple of sectors that he tracks very closely. Rumit, hi, good morning and thank you for joining us. Since you track the telecom sector closely, I want to start off by asking you about Idea. That stock has been under a bit of pressure in the last couple of days, ever since it bought Videocon's spectrum and has to make that payment of more than 3,300 crores. But for the longer-term investor, how do you approach that stock?
See, we've been cautious on the telecom space for almost 2 years now. And the primary reason why we've been cautious is, one, I think the broader sector is going to undergo a high capex over the next 2 to 3 years. And as a result, the free cash flow generations and earnings are going to come under pressure. Second is the voice pricing environment still remains pretty weak. And plus, with data picking up, there is a risk of voice cannibalization. So I think the kind of growth rates that you've seen over the last few years, you could see some moderation coupled with high capital intensity. And finally, you've got a new entrant coming in. So excess capacity in the sector is obviously negative for pricing. So I think from a medium-term perspective, you're going to see pricing to remain under pressure, and thus we continue to stay cautious.
Okay. What about Reliance Communication? It's possibly going to sell its entire stake in Reliance Infratel. If it does, would your analysis maybe on specific telecom companies change, and your analysis of the deal if it happens?
So we don't cover Reliance Communications.
From an industry perspective, your thoughts?
So from an industry perspective, I think you're seeing some consolidation on the tower infrastructure space, and a lot of broader telecom players have high leverage. So thus, asset sales which can reduce debt on the balance sheets will be obviously positive for those specific companies. And I think most of the players have to invest in data spectrum and data networks, and thus they would want to release some capital from selling these assets. So I think at the margin it will reduce the stress on the balance sheet.
Okay. You also track the IT space very closely, Rumit, and we've seen the way Infosys has come off this month. I think there's been a tad bit of a recovery, but give and take everything, Infosys has fallen about close to 8% in the month of November. Is there more weakness in store, you think?
See, I think they had flagged it off that second half is going to be weak, and particularly the third quarter. And given that there is an element of seasonality, plus in the second quarter there were some one-time revenues and also higher number of billing days. So you put all of that together, I think they had flagged it off, and I think it's more of seasonal in nature. I think fundamentally the valuations are not very expensive, although the growth rates for the sector have come down. But I think valuations are still reasonable, and we still expect 12 to 15% upside in the stock over the next 1 year.
Do you look at Eros International? Any thoughts on all of the developments that has plagued the company?
No, I don't cover Eros.
Okay, but you do cover the media space. So Z Entertainment, you think the ad revenue growth can be as robust as Q2?
Yeah, I think the broader media momentum in terms of consumer advertising spends, e-commerce as a space, I think those segments in the media space continue to spend on advertising, and thus for large players who've got dominant market share will continue to enjoy high advertising growth. Second is Z obviously has a new channel which wasn't there last year, so I think they have that additional inventory. So I think even Q3 we expect them to beat most analyst expectations. Thus we still think there is room for earnings upgrades, and Z remains one of our top picks in the media space.
Okay, so that's about the media space. I think we can squeeze in one last question. So let me ask you what your top pick is in the mid-cap IT space, because you do track, Mindtree, Mphasis, NIIT Tech and all of that. What's the top pick there?
So our topic there is FirstSource. We think the valuations there are very, very reasonable. Second, growth outlook has improved materially. So we expect their second half to be very, very strong. And this growth momentum should continue into the next year. So I think given the cash flow generation at 8 times earnings, that remains one of our top picks in the mid-cap ID space.
Okay, fair enough, Rumit. We leave it on that note. Thanks very much for joining in and talking to us.